Blacksmithing is another one of the many ways that Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord gives you control over the sandbox of Calradia, as you grow your fledgling miner clan into a kingdom that spans across the many cities of the world. With that being said, there are a number of issues with the current crafting system, from sell prices to a lot of the quote-unquote rules seemingly being disjointed or just non-existent. In this video, we're going to drill down on some of the current mechanics in the game and how or what I'd propose to fix them so that crafting is a much more engaging experience in Bannerlord. Then we're going to discuss the addition of other mechanics or flavorful bits of gameplay to make crafting, again, more engaging. To be clear, this isn't a video that is meant to aggressively attack Taleworlds. They've already told us in a developer update that they will be completely redoing the crafting system, and that is hopefully being done in the near future. Rather, this is my proposed changes and what parts of the current system are highly exploitable or at least just wildly broken. I'm breaking this video into individual parts where we'll be talking about any issues and improvements that can be made, starting with the current system as is and covering pricing, unlocking parts, difficulty of crafting items, blacksmith skills, smithing resources, smithing bonuses, stamina, and some miscellaneous issues. So you can quickly navigate to each one of the chapters in the timeline if you'd like to jump ahead. And we'll close the video out talking about expanding crafting by discussing some other ideas I have in mind. I'd like to quickly give a huge shout out to Matt Ross for a lot of these proposed changes. He shared a lot of his ideas and we hashed out a few more or discussed some stuff about his thoughts. So a huge thank you to him. But let's get started on fixing crafting in Bannerlord. We're going to start out with one of the largest culprits in pricing. Now, I know a lot of you guys know this, you make a javelin, jack it up to the largest, make the shaft the largest size, and voila, you'll have a javelin that sells for 110k, and your money woes have been solved. So this is obviously a huge issue with the game. And yeah, you can just simply say, okay, it's going to scale differently, and then that's that, and it fixes it. But what I'm proposing is that the base value for selling something is dependent upon more than just simply the damage. As it is right now, if I were to make this javelin with the lowest size in the shaft, let me actually go back over here, we'll bring this back down to normal. Then the missile pierce damage is 88. This will sell for far cheaper than one that has a missile pierce damage of 100. This is a skewed scale. I mean, obviously this shouldn't work this way because, as we all know, every single weapon doesn't just simply equate its damage to its viability or usability in combat. You sometimes look at stuff like reach, especially if you are on a horse, stuff like that. So I'm going to flash up a chart here, and this is kind of the way I think that they should probably do it, or at least something similar to this. Of course, this is just a proposition, as it were. So you're going to see a number of values. I'm going to go over everything right now. So on the far left, you have got all these different stats: swing speed, swing damage, length, handling. Those are roughly what you'll be dealing with a melee weapon. Obviously, with javelin, you have stuff like missile pierce damage, missile speed, and accuracy. Those would then change. And then next to that, you have a column that says best in class. So this would simply be, let's say you want to craft a two-handed axe. This would be the absolute best swing speed, swing damage, length, and handling of any axe across all the axes. So let's just say one two-handed axe has got 102 swing speed. Well, maybe it doesn't have a lot of swing damage, but the very best swing damage is 138. So you're taking your top line of all of these stats, and you're then going to compare it to your crafted weapon. So as you can see here in this example, we've got swing speed of 102 as best in class. The crafted weapon that we've crafted hypothetically for this graph would be 95. This would result in a score ratio, which is a crafted weapon divided by best in class, of 0.9. You're probably like, what the hell? All these numbers, what does this all mean? What I'm really trying to say is there should be different weights for all of the stat lines of your weapons that then equal the roughly base value of that weapon. So as we look at this across, we can see that swing speed is valued or weighted at 1,000. This is just a monetary amount that I've slapped on here that has no basis in anything other than me just giving a weight to it. So then we're taking that 1,000 and 93% of it is 931. So that's our crafted value of swing speed for the crafted weapon we've made. Now I know that can be very dizzying, but once you kind of put it all together, it's basically saying like, okay, hey, you maybe didn't have the best swing speed and you certainly didn't have the best handling on the item you crafted, but you had really good damage and really good length, and those things have both the highest and the lowest weight across both of them, and that results in a total crafting amount of 5,192. So this way you have a very clear and present crafting formula that you can follow and get a good idea for how your crafting prices work. Because look at this right now. So if I jump back here and I go into trade, we're going to take a look at two of these that I've already crafted. So here's the crafted javelin just default. I selected javelin, I selected the tier 4 head and the shaft and pressed craft. It's at 486 because its damage is 55 pierce damage. Now this one, I jacked the handle all the way up, the shaft, and it does 110,000 gold because, of course, the damage is almost fully double it at 98 pierce damage. So what we're saying here is that if you just simply take that damage, you get this system that blows it out of proportion. And then to just kind of scale that back under the hood and say, okay, well, it's no longer that crafted javelins are going to be this much, they're going to be this much. It's just a kind of number that the developers, whatever system that they're using to formulate this number right here, are just kind of tweaking under the hood. If it's a set in stone formulaic approach to pricing, or that kind of shows you, hey, this is how it knocks it up and down, it makes it easier for any kind of character that wants to make a blacksmith playthrough able to actually take advantage of that system to gain value out of being a blacksmith. Now, this is the first part of it, right? We have to establish a base value. But after that, we then have to go into that value via the trade penalty. Now, if you take a look, I gotta press cancel first. If you take a look at your character profile, of course, you have got trade as its own set of skills, and this helps you with making profit, right? Trade penalty reduction plus 0.2 or 6.2%. Right now, it's just kind of a flat number that's influenced by your smithing skill and the player's trade skill. So instead of a flat number, it should maybe have some sort of logarithmic approach. The trade penalty could increase the higher the base value of the item. So this way you get a natural system that kind of curbs it, but at the same time, a system that also encourages it by being both a trader and a blacksmith. You can kind of reduce that penalty, get more out of selling your hard-earned or smithed goods across the lands. And that is, I think, a really important distinction here. Do I want to make a blacksmith that is going to make me a sword for myself? Cool. I'm going to specialize in smithing. Do I want to make a blacksmith as a means to playing a quote-unquote tall character that simply focuses on trade and commerce? Well, smithing and trade is where I want to go. And if you kind of create this distinction, I feel like it makes for a very diverse approach to smithing, and also a very predictable one to the pricing system, rather than having this inflated, broken one where you make one set of javelins, you're set for the whole entire game. Moving back into the crafting screen, another big issue is unlocking parts. It's arguably the most frustrating part of playing a blacksmith playthrough is unlocking these individual, parts. And the current system as is very random and doesn't make much sense. You disassemble or smelt a dagger, all of a sudden you get parts for an axe or a mace or a sword. It doesn't really it's like a two-handed sword especially. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So what I'm kind of proposing here is two different solutions, or maybe even both of them. But what I think the biggest, most obvious solution here is if you disassemble an axe or smelt an axe, then you get parts for the axe. Just a clear one-to-one on it. But even moreover, what I think would be very interesting is if you get specific parts. Like take, for example, a spatha. Let me see if I actually have one in here. Smelt. Like a pitchfork. Okay, we know what parts are in this pitchfork. And if you smelt the pitchfork, then you'll get progress towards unlocking those parts of the pitchfork. And maybe this way, it's not so so much of a random unlocking process of, okay, I smelted and I hope I unlock the parts. There's maybe a gauge that fills, that slowly builds as you start smelting pieces of tier 1 pole arms. Okay, you're now going to get progress towards all tier 1 parts, but maybe you get progress towards the specific parts that were part of that weapon a little more so. For example, again, let's just use the pitchfork. You get 100, quote unquote, whatever that 100 is, metaphorical number here, points towards the research of the pitchfork head itself. And you get 50 points towards, say, a different tier 1 polearm head. So this way you are putting progress into the tiers of polearm, but you're also putting it specifically into the ones that you want to unlock so that you can craft a weapon that you want, a specific weapon that you want. You know, take over here at the Manavlian, right? I want that specific Manavlian head, so I'm going to keep smelting Manavlians when I find them. And once I do this enough times, boom, I now get the Manavlian head. Now, this can also kind of be expanded upwards. So when we go back to Forge here, we can see tier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and of course there's a 6, and a heroic tier I think is a special one. So what I think would be very interesting here is that if you are breaking down tier 1 items, then it's a sliding scale upwards where you get research bonus towards the tier above it at 1/3 of its rate. And then you get research towards the second tier above it at 66% of its rate. And then the third tier above it, you get no experience towards. So basically, if you are a fledgling blacksmith and you are breaking down these tier 1 tools, you get less experience for tiers above it, but you still are learning the craft, right? You're breaking these things down. You're kind of understanding how these constituent parts work together. And oh, boom, you're starting to build into tier 2 unlockable parts. So you yourself can expand your repertoire. And I think this could work down too. So if I'm like, let's just click all the way up to tier 5. If I'm breaking down tier 5, well, I should, again, on a sliding scale, get experience for what's it called? Tiers below that. And I'd say do that at a 10% rate. So if I'm destroying a tier 5 item, I get 100% of quote unquote experience or research rate, whatever the term would be, towards tier 5 parts. And I get 90% towards tier 4, 80% in 3, 60, and then down to 50. So this way, if you say get 1,000 points, you get that incrementally broken down to the previous tiers so that you don't really just lose out on being a top tier blacksmith who hasn't unlocked all the other blacksmith parts. This way it kind of encourages you to continue smelting in the later portions of the game. I think that that's probably one of the biggest things is there's nothing that encourages you to smelt once you've found exactly the piece you need to probably, you know, monopolize the entire economy by selling javelins, but that's neither here nor there. So that's a kind of a proposition there, right? Like make it a 1-to-1. Now, in addition, I think it'd be very interesting to be able to buy knowledge. If you could simply go here, go to the town, take a look at your notables. Do we have anyone here that is owner of the artisans, linen weavery, woodwork shop? Maybe if there's a particular ironmonger. Okay, so there's no ironmongers here. But maybe if there's an ironmonger, you can buy specific cultural pieces from those ironmongers in the cultural locations that they are. So for example, if you want to, let's just jump here to like tier 5, because these ones are pretty sweet, right? The mountain blade, not mountain blade here is a Battanian sword. So I would need to go to Battanian ironmongers to try and find this part to buy, and it's randomly generated, changes every couple of days, and maybe it's based off of the prosperity of the town, based off of how much they have to offer and what their top tier is. So for example, say, hey, this is the lowest prosperity ironmonger in the Battanian civilization or kingdom. Well, then they're only really going to offer you tiers 1 and 2 because this guy's not really of great repute. Oh, this is the really high good one. Well, he's got all the goodies, and he maybe has a higher inventory or only a higher tier of inventory, which would cost you more to learn. So I think that that'd be a very interesting way to do things. And you can even expand that further, right? You could make a legendary blacksmith that randomly spawns somewhere in your game, either at a city or at a town, and you have to talk to the other blacksmiths to get rumors, to discover where he is, to then get access to special parts that only he sells and are randomly recycled. I think that'd be a really cool way to make blacksmithing this engaging portion of the game outside of just simply, okay, I'm going to smelt randomly until I hopefully get the parts I need and then make the weapons I need for, again, either economic benefits or to make a very specific weapon I want to make. So I think really kind of creating that lotto to the to buying those individual parts or breaking down your individual weapons more rewarding is a really great way to fix the issue of unlocking parts. Now, another big issue is the difficulty of crafting items. It definitely has to be reworked because the current system, it doesn't treat all parts equally. It basically kind of takes a look at the tier and then adds a certain amount of difficulty. Like tier 1, for example, will add 10 difficulty. But it will then not kind of add that across multiple tiers. So for example, I have got tier 5 for my blade, then tier 1, and tier 1 for every other part. If I jack up the size, it then will make it harder here. What will happen here though is if I use 2 tier 5 pieces and I only increase the size of 1 tier 5 piece, it will multiply this as if both have been increased in size. That is an issue because you're not increasing the size of that other item, should not increase the difficulty for that item to be used. So when you take a look at that, I think that that is a really big issue. There should be kind of a standardized format for the actual difficulty of things, saying, okay, it's going to be on this sliding scale of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and the increasing size maybe has this percentage chance of increasing the difficulty depending on what it is. But decreasing size maybe lowers difficulty, so you can constantly balance it. The way that it affects your stats, of course, by going larger and smaller, but it does not necessarily affect the difficulty in the right way. See, as I drop the difficulty on everything else, it still is at 97. If I drop this, it'll drop all the way to 80. But keeping the difficulty separate and not just saying, okay, the largest tier dictates the overall difficulty doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It makes it better to kind of give and take, right? Okay, if I'm going to make this weapon, the blade really long, well, I'm going to have to sacrifice a little bit here and there. You know, the way things typically are when you actually smith stuff. And I only know that from watching Forged in Fire way too much on Netflix. But moving into another portion here is cosmetic parts shouldn't add to anything. It should just kind of be, hey, this is solely a cosmetic addition to the weapon or, weapon. You can't craft armor. We'll get to that later. And I think the difficulty needs to be reworked on a per weapon class basis, because currently all tier 1 parts incur 10 difficulty, but different weapon classes require different amounts of parts. So take, for example, an axe has 2 required parts. This makes it a lot cheaper and easier to produce high quality axes that you can then exploit the economy system or what have you. I think it should definitely be refactored per individual, click this up here, per individual weapon class to have it make sense. If it's got 4 pieces, okay, distribute them evenly if you so wish. Or if it's got 2 pieces, distribute those evenly, equaling out to 100, whatever it is. But that kind of brings me into my last point here. I think the difficulty should be scaled off of what piece as well. Kind of like what we were talking about with pricing. Obviously, far and away, the blade is going to make the most effect on stuff like your swing damage and your thrust damage, as you can see there. So it should have the highest weight in the overall difficulty of the production of a sword, and then move it into stuff like the hilt or the pommel or the handle, depending on which stat we're going to look at next. I think that those are really important ways to fluctuate, but also maintain a set course for the difficulty of crafting weapons that isn't just kind of simply, okay, I'm going to take my top tier and put it all the way to the top, and that's the hardest this will possibly be to make, even if I were to jack all these up to the highest length as well too. So you get my point here. It should be based off of individual parts, the individual item class, and then that part's weight towards the overall resulting weapon that you will be creating. Moving over to the character page, we're going to talk about blacksmith skills or smithing skills. Now, just a disclaimer up front, this is probably the only skill tree next to, say, charm that has not been touched at all yet, right? No campaign and battle effects, just simply the same exact effects as when the game was first released in early access back in March. So We do know that this is coming. There is going to be a revamp to the perk system, and that's probably going to be with the smithing system. So it's kind of an unfair thing to judge as much as I'm going to judge it right now. But I just want to make that disclaimer up front. There's a change coming. But my problem right now is pretty much how, I guess, linear the smithing tree is. If you want to produce weapons at any kind of good rate, then you need to take a very specific path through the smithing tree. And there's a couple wild cards here and there that you don't really need to worry about. But for example, you will be just overwhelmed with the amount of crude iron, steel, and fine steel in your playthrough. So all three of these skills, Efficient Iron Maker, Steelmaker, and Steelmaker 2, are pretty useless versus this one, Curious Smelter and Curious Smith, which are going to drastically increase the amount of parts that you're going to be getting from smelting or blacksmithing. Remember, we already discussed this, but parts are one of the hardest things to control in the smithing experience. So you need these benefits to hopefully unlock the parts that you need to make the weapons that you want. Then moving forward here too, Steelmaker 3 is the only one that makes sense out of these two because it is so hard to get a reliable amount of Thamiskene steel. Using this, you actually are able to produce it. So this is one of those the only one of those three sets of traits that makes a lot of sense to just go into that direction. But as we kind of jump over here to like Practical Smith, or say stuff like Practical or Artisan Smith, whoops, you really want to go with Practical Smith because stamina is such a huge hurdle that you're dealing with when you're playing through a smithing character. And then you jump all the way over into the 250 section. Where is that? 250 section. You get both Sharpened Edge versus Sharpened Tip. Both of them are not in the game just yet. They're not turned on. But it really doesn't make a whole ton of sense to go with Sharpened Tip here. You'd want to go probably with Sharpened Edge because a lot of the time you really can't affect the things that are going to have that tip actually take advantage of it. So the skill system is very linear. Like I said, you're really going to be shoehorned into very specific skill choices, and it kind of makes it so every single smith going through this system is roughly the same. And I think that is a pretty big issue. So I think the biggest way to change it is to add those secondary effects and to add some additional things to them that could really help out. And we're going to talk about that actually in a section further on. But I think it is huge to make smithing feel unique, and I think that can be done through these little ones with the asterisks, or not this one. Is it this one? Yeah, the fine weapon one, the one for legendary and stuff like that. Where is it? Oh, it's right here, masterwork weapon, and then this one for legendary weapon. So we'll talk about those in another section here, but I think really weighing or leaning on those is going to make smithing a very interesting tree, as well as expanding out their secondary effects whenever we do get that with the inbound crafting rework. Piggybacking what we were talking about with the smelting choices, resources is another huge issue with smithing. Because as it is right now, when it comes to going into any city, you really have a very limited amount of resources, actual components or materials needed to smith that you can purchase. You have to, for the most part, do your smelting. But from there, you get a very unbalanced system. So for example here, let's sort this by value. This Highland Broadblade, probably here, we'll go ahead and buy it real quick and take a look. We'll press done, we'll go to the smithy, and we'll go to smelt. That Highland Broadblade is going to produce for me 5 fine steel bricks and 1 Thamiskene steel, which is quite nice. But you have some weapons out there that have a higher tier, 4, 5, or 6, that will just simply give you wrought iron, crude iron, or iron, and maybe steel. It might have some combination of 1 or 2, if not 3 of these. And then you've got some low tier items like a Pugio or a Sex, which give you very high tier components. So it's very not balanced, meaning you don't really need to worry about those smelting perks if everything you smelt just gives you an exorbitant amount of resources to produce whatever weapons you want. So the crafting system is already broken out the gate from that alone. You can sit there and do a lot of early combat with looters and mountain bandits, get a ton of Pugios or Sexes and stuff like that, and then just smelt it all, have all the resources for high tier javelins, make them, and there you go. You're off to the bank. You've made tons of money. So I think the real big thing here is making it so resources are available in towns to purchase, and then scale back or at least balance out how much resources are delivered by certain tier weapons. So like I said, you're not getting a tier 1 or 2 weapon giving you tier 5 and 6, or I guess fine steel and Thamiskene steel components or materials whenever you go to smelt them. I think fixing that is a huge step. Moving on back to the skill screen, let's talk about smithing bonuses. So as it is right now, you get fine smith or fine weapon, then masterwork, and then you get legendary. And those give you flat bonuses of 2, 5, and 10 on stats that spread out across the weapon. So that's kind of a paltry benefit. So I've got 6 little changes I'd like to see made to this system to make it worthwhile and make smithing very fun with it. So for one, I think the first big change is that rather than this being a flat bonus, so again, like here, 10% chance to create a fine weapon, so on and so forth, rather than it being a flat bonus of 2, 5, or 10, make it percentage based. 10%, 20%, and 30% plus 1% per level above 275. So this way, if you are this really cool legendary smith, you're getting a 30% bonus on the stats, maybe up to a soft cap on your weapons you produce, because you're a legendary smith. Making again a Pugio for a legendary smith is nothing, right? It's going to be something that he is inconsequential. He can do it with his eyes closed. So make it have that little oomph to it. In addition, our second thing here is that this says has a 5% chance to create, has a 10%, then has a 10% chance to create a fine masterwork or legendary weapon. Just make it automatic. Give me the reward for getting to that level of 100 skill or 200 skill or 275 skill. Make it feel like it's got weight behind it, because I've created that prefix for the weapon. It's a fine, it's a masterwork, it's a legendary, or give it at a very high percentage, 80 or 90%, because I get it. You know, even the best smith is going to have to double quench because he's got a warp in the blade and it will not cut. But still, sorry, another Forged in Fire reference. But still, I think that if we make it so that being a masterwork or a legendary smith has more weight behind it beside a 5% chance to get a legendary weapon, give me something more. And I think that is a good way to do it. And there's a little bit more here. So right now, the fine weapon skill has to be selected, right? You have to choose experienced smith. You have to choose master smith. You have to choose legendary smith. Well, if we look at the new engineering skills, we go to 150, we see that siege engineer has its governor bonus, but it can craft fire versions of its siege engine. The other 150 skill gives a different governor bonus, but the same engineer bonus, can craft fire versions of a siege engine. So I think that smithing should have that same system. Make it so that no matter what, you get fine weapons at a certain level for both perk choices. And also, in addition to that, I say change when they are. Do it at 75, 270, or I'm sorry, 75, 175, and then 275. That way, you know, you've got 100 points difference between each one of them. Or maybe the first one's at 100, right? 100 and then 175 and 275. Just make it so that there's a natural scale and you're guaranteed to create your fine masterwork or legendary weapons. So it has, like, again, a little bit more oomph to it. And last thing here, I think I said 6, but I've gone into 5. The last thing here is that if you create a weapon with an alternative weapon mode, such as a one-handed and two-handed sword, then those bonuses are split between both the modes. They're not, okay, you get 10 bonuses to all the stats in one-handed and 10 bonuses to all the stats in two-handed. You just get them split, 5 and 5. So fix that too. Make it so that this goes towards both modes and makes it so that you're making a really strong weapon. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense if you are, my sword is really good with one hand, but if I switch to two-handed, reach drops off the bat. I can't even swing it. Like, I think it makes a little more sense to give more, or maybe even give a percentage to one or the other, but make it so that choosing a different alternative mode to your weapon doesn't actually hinder your natural abilities as a smith and have you curtail those bonuses. Okay, one of the last things here to talk about is stamina. Now, stamina, of course, needs an overhaul. I think for one, it needs to regen when you're moving on the map. Maybe just at a slower rate than when you're at a city, much like we get with our healing. And I think that alone would be a massive improvement. And we've got this new UI, which is kind of nice here. But I think they need to add the option to see stamina when you're not in the smithing window. If I could just say, okay, jump back over here, and maybe I can hover over this and it'll also show me my stamina. It gives me my hit points, it gives me my stamina, and maybe my stamina recovery rate, if it wants to go that far. I don't think I need to see the recovery rate unless they add a recovery rate skill or perk in the new skills, but I think as is, just give me the ability to see stamina, either in this bar directly or by hovering over health. And lastly, I think that stamina should increase per your smithing skill. This character is 90, he's got 100 stamina. This character is 180 skill and has 100 stamina. Give me 1 stamina point per skill. Or maybe if that's too much, 0.5 stamina per skill, so that if I've got 300 skill, my natural 100 plus the 150 equals 250 stamina that I can use to make weapons. Or again, make it so that you get a discount on your stamina for making weapons below a certain threshold or difficulty. Like basically make that stamina be a little bit more dynamic and less static, because right now it is so draining to grind up your crafting skill, and stamina is the biggest reason behind that, even outside of the different parts not being able to find them. All right, so before we jump into some expanded crafting, I want to go over some miscellaneous things that really are just kind of all over the place. So this will be a little bit more of a rant or tangenty kind of stuff, so there's less structure here, but overall, I think that there needs to be more transparency in the crafting menu. Right now, for example, if I were to make a two-handed axe, it's just a two-handed axe. Well, let me know what's the rate of cleaving with this thing, and even more so, what's the rate of cleaving with a two-handed weapon? And add cleaving to more than just the two-handed axe. This way I can see, okay, hey, this has got a cleave chance of this much because of maybe let's go back to axe. Maybe it's the handle itself that is reducing or increasing my cleave chance, or the head itself that is reducing or increasing my cleave chance. Give me that kind of transparency just like this so that I can see it on the weapons I'm making. In addition to, I would like to be able to know if this is going to give me a bonus versus shield. Can I use a shield with it? Is it usable in civilian options, or in town, I guess it were. That I think is a really strong use, or a really strong addition to crafting and transparency. I think that's what makes it a little bit difficult, is you're not really sure what to do because you're kind of clicking some things and you press the craft button and there you go, boom, out it's done. And if we're also looking at crafted weapons as this really cool, awesome thing you've created, if I go into my menu and go into inventory, go back into my shields, these items, if I were to gift them to an NPC, I would get relation. They would, oh, hey, you made this item. This is quite nice. But if I were to trade them to an NPC for 1 gold, I would get way more relation. So if I craft an item, have some worth behind it, aside from, oh, you want to trade it for 1 gold, then I'm going to give you even more relation. So that, I'm sure, is just a simple bug, but that's one that could definitely be changed to make it so that you're a blacksmith and you're using your renowned blacksmith skills to increase your, well, renown with other people. And this is a cool way to do it, and right now the system's a little skewed, so I think that's an issue. Also, let me see the stack. Like, if I'm going to make a throwing weapon, let's just say throwing axes, I don't know the stack here. And also, if I make one that has got very low weight, then I get 1 or 3 stack. If I make something that's tier 6, then I get higher stacks. Make stacks relative to some value, or make it so you have the ability to increase the stack of a throwing weapon by sacrificing certain things. Okay, you're not going to get so much damage because you had to make a smaller handle to increase the stack, and there's your trade-off. Have a little bit more balance in that so that I, again, have transparency on what I'm making, and also B, so that you can see the exact kind of results of what you want to do. And I guess a last option here would be about if crafting is going to get a rework, I think to make it better would be additional filter and options in the inventory management screen, because you're going to be spending so much of your time in inventory. Having everything being shoved into miscellaneous is kind of cumbersome. So maybe add another blip here, or maybe a button for the ability to just look at craftable items. Even if it was just a checkbox here that I could click and all my crafting items just immediately popped up, or just the materials I've got, it would make navigating what I have easier than me having to go into a crafting screen, into the smithy screen, to see all of it laid out. This kind of, again, creates a little bit more transparency, reduces a lot of the bog down of crafting, but I think really helps out. So this is just, again, some miscellaneous things, some other little things I had some quirks and issues with I wanted to bring up. Let's move now into how we could possibly expand crafting. Now, having discussed tweaking things, let's talk about expanding craftings, or I guess things that could be added to the game, new additions overall that are not existing in the game as is. And when we look at crafting right now, it's great that it does cover all shapes and sizes of metal weapons, I guess you could, if that's what you want to call it, pretty much everything in this category list, right? But it does not cover fletching or bows or crossbows in any way, shape, or form. So if we wanted to expand smithing, I guess we could go over here and take a look at our character profile again real quick. If you wanted to expand smithing, it'd be nice if maybe it was just called crafting. And this would maybe include weapons of, swords, shields, so on and so forth. Well, I guess shields is another good one. Throw shields into the mix. But also the ability to craft bows and crossbows, or maybe even the ability to craft bows and crossbows is in their respective skill lines. Now, I do realize that what I'm talking about might require a huge overhaul to a lot of systems, or the addition to systems that are not present. So this might be something that Taleworlds says, this is better off as a mod than our official stance on it, until they maybe do a DLC in the future. Warband had plenty of DLCs, so I don't think that Bannerlord is going to skimp out on that possibility. So just talking about bows and arrows and bolts and arrows, well, bows and arrows. I'm talking about bows, crossbows, bolts, arrows, all those different means of crafting any kind of range weapon is great. I think crafting shields would be amazing, but I think the big one would be crafting armor and horse armor. And I know this is something that a lot of people have put in that community wish list as a request, the ability to craft that horse armor. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Even if you wanted to slap it into smithing as is, I think it just fits. I mean, horse armor is a huge part of the game, even if you don't want to do an economical playthrough, right? Horse armor is something that you need. You need to have a harness on your horse, or else you suffer a penalty. And there are a lot of different types of horse armor. It'd be cool to be able to kind of customize that much in the same way that you can with weapons. Like, take a look at this. Well, let me just put a horse on my character here real quick. We'll just slap this guy right there, and we'll put this there, and we'll swap it. So taking a look at this, you've got the actual barding itself in all of its different ways, shapes, and forms here. This is the step half barding, but then maybe you want to customize the saddle, or the actual, I don't know the name of it, the cloth that drapes under the saddle so that you don't chafe your thighs when you're riding a horse. Like, take a look at this chain horse barding. It does have a different saddle all around here too. So it'd be cool to be able to customize these things as a way of creating horse armor for your character. Even if they didn't want to take that extra step here in throwing in the customization of making your own armor, which I think is a tragedy, even just doing horse armor is a nice addition to the game in my mind. Making crafting a little bit more comprehensive, a little bit more fun, and a great way to add a lot of variety to the game. If we look at armor as it is, we already get prefixes on it, right? We get these rusty imperial open mail coif, or a coif, as I believe it is actually pronounced. Well, why can't that have fine or masterwork or legendary affixed to it if you have the proper skills in armor crafting, or just slapping it together into smithing as a whole? I think that would be such an amazing improvement upon the game. And for those people that are saying like, hey, there isn't a lot of variety when it comes to armor. And when I say those people, I am included in those people. There's not enough variety in armor. Well, now you can craft that variety in any way, shape, or form you'd like. Are you playing a Battanian character who maybe has an Imperial root, and you want to create armor that has that combination of Imperial root and Battanian influence on it? Well, you can now custom build that out by swapping out certain pieces here and there for your Battanian Imperial chain armor, as it were, or whatever you want to call it, name it however it wants to be. So I think that is a really cool way to add a lot of granularity and a lot of really cool expansion upon crafting. I think that's one of the biggest things with crafting is that while it does have a lot of issues with it and it can be fixed, it's still at the very end of the day very one-sided. It's got a single facet to it, and I think it needs to be expanded upon a little bit more. Maybe even new materials in the way of wood for all of your different bows and crossbows, and those woods maybe make for, hey, this is a sturdier crossbow or a sturdier bow, and it's maybe not as flexible, so it doesn't have a longer range, but it's very taut, so it has a higher amount of damage. Whatever it needs to be that makes sense to creating bows or crossbows out of different material. Maybe it's the same thing with arrows and the bolts that accompany them as well. Now, with this, we could also maybe tweak into this some new character skills, stuff in the governing, or where is it? I guess we could go into leadership. I mean, governor skills are just kind of all over the place, right? But governor skills that kind of improve crafting related buildings in your actual settlements that you control, or maybe improve the garrison of troops. Maybe this is going to be attached to the revamped smithing skill line, and it does offer us that for governors. So if you have a companion that does have a high amount of smithing, maybe when they do the smithing rework to the perks, they're going to add campaign perks that say, hey, you now are going to naturally increase the combat effectiveness of your garrison because he's swapping out armor for the garrison or making new weapons for the garrison, stuff like that. Things that I think really need to happen. And that can also extend to the party leaders and or captains too, right? Improvements to troop armor and or weapons, much in the same way that we get in the one-handed skill tree, right? Infantry troops and information are leading, increase their movement speed by 5%. Okay, that's for shield bearer. 2%, that's governor, captain, cavalry troops information you are leading, increase their melee damage by 5%. Little things like this that would go a long way to really helping out the way that smithing integrates into not just simply your character's playthrough, but the party he leads, the party that your companion potentially leads, or the formation your companion potentially leads, or even the settlement that your companion is the governor of. A lot of really cool ways to expand upon that, and much in the same way that we've already seen as well. And I think you can even, as a kind of a last parting note here, it'd be very cool to see crafting quests added into the game. Because if you want to go through a strictly economic crafting trade-based character, maybe that's how you go about it. You get these crafting quests that say, hey, I need you to make me a masterwork masterwork sword, or I need 10 fine crafted weapons. Something like that, that kind of almost is like when you're playing an MMO and they have like those writs. Like I think Elder Scrolls Online's got an excellent example. Hey, here's a writ, go craft me these items, and it's a great way to get skill, experience, and money. Boom, there you go, you've done it. You're not just simply crafting and grinding away in a screen. It's a little bit more dynamic. You're moving from place to place, and maybe there's even a different icon for crafting quests so that you can kind of pinpoint them a little bit easier. If it's just simply a blue icon and I scroll up and I look around, all right, well, there's potentially 4 quest hubs around me, 5 quest hubs around me, and maybe they've got crafting quests, maybe they don't. So maybe if we make it so that if Taleworlds made it so that if they added crafting quests, they had a different icon. So it made a little bit more transparency in the type of playthrough I wanted to do. But as a whole, that really kind of brings our video here to an end, guys. I wanted to discuss some things about blacksmithing. I wanted to discuss some of the things that are wrong with it and some of the things that could be possibly improved upon. This was not meant to, of course, attack Taleworlds in any way, shape, or form. It's just simply a means to get a discussion going about stuff that I think that a lot of us would really like added in or changed or fixed or whatever it is with the crafting system. But thank you so much for watching here today. If you have any suggestions or any ways that you would like to see the crafting system personally changed, by all means, please go ahead and leave a comment below. I know the developers watch this video, they read the comments, I know they read the forums and the Reddit. They are very embroiled in the community, and not just making the game better because of their vision, making the game better because of the feedback they get from you guys. Mexico was on one of my last live streams, and he watched a lot of it, and he said like, hey, we watch a lot of what your videos are and read the comments of your videos more importantly, and it helps in developer feedback. And he was giving us tips and comments about, hey, do this, do that, or this is the way that this actually works. So it's great to see that the developers are so transparent and they are so verbal with the community. So please, by all means, like I said, talk about what you'd like to have changed, and really dive deep on it. Let them know exactly what you're looking for in a revised crafting system. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment below, all that fun action. But have a good one and take care.